That's my introduction with the music fading in and out. Let me try that again.
We drift deeper into the sound, feeling strong.
Hello guys, and welcome to another episode. So today, or this episode, I'm going to be explaining a style of going no widow mines in TvZ. Mind is blown. You no longer need widow mines to play TvZ if you want to go bio. Apparently the new composition is Marines, Marauders, Hellbats, and Thors. And so today we're going to be looking at two games that showcase this new age no widow mine based style that we are all forced to live in after Blizzard nerfed the widow mine. Alright, so the first game that we're going to be looking at today is between Fantasy and Roro. It was played in Pro League earlier this week. There's Roro. There's Fantasy. And this is the first of the two games we're going to be looking at today. The second game we will be looking at is Flash versus DongRaeGu, played on Frost, played a couple days later. Flash opens up a different style, but he does end up transitioning into the same macro style that Fantasy is doing in this game. Although we're going to be looking at Fantasies first, because believe it or not, Fantasy did do something better than Flash. Even though Flash is an amazing player and is a god and a genius. Fantasy obviously knows what he's doing, or he's one step ahead of the meta, I guess, than Flash. So I just want to do a quick rundown of what Fantasy's build is. He's going to be doing a Hellion Banshee opener where he makes 10 Hellions and 2 Cloak Banshees before he transitions into a fast, well, not really fast 3rd CC, but relatively fast 3rd Command Center, and then he transitions into Bio, Marauder, Hellbat, Thor. And we're going to see how he does this and what kind of micro is involved and other steps in the process to make this style work. So the first thing I'd like to point out, not the first, I already said that. The second thing I'd like to point out is that the build that Fantasy opens with is an extremely safe build. So he makes a total of 10 Hellions and 2 Cloak Banshees. There is not a single all-in I can think of. Roach Bane, Baneling Bust, Roach Baneling Bust, Fake Roach Baneling Bust, really fast Baneling Bust. Not really many all-ins, but there's not really any all-ins that can break a Hellion Banshee opener. It's very defensive, and at the same time it can be used for aggression as well. Just as aggressively as those Korean girls are waving their signs around. Anyways, so yeah, if you are looking for a safe build order because you are dying too much against all-ins of Zerg, then I definitely suggest opening up Hellion Banshee. And you don't necessarily have to go for a mech build after Hellion Banshee as well, as we'll see in this game. Bio is completely plausible, and I don't think one favors the other in this situation. So, Fantasy's just his Reaper Scout. Obviously, you want to check the gas, and he sees that the gas is almost. He can just click the gas geyser, and then he can start, or then he knows when speed is roughly going to finish. So he has approximately a little less than 2 minutes, 1 minute and 50 seconds for his Reaper to be out on the map. What I like to do is to hop in with the Reaper again at 5 minutes and 30 seconds, game timer, and check to see if there's gas mining or not. And if there's gas mining, then he's going to either be going a fast layer, or he could be doing a potential Baneling Bust or Roach Bust, because he's continuing to mine gas. But if he's not mining gas, then it's just macro speedlings, and he's going to take a 3rd base and make a bunch of queens. Alright, so another thing I'd like to point out is that Fantasy only made 1 Reaper, I believe. I'm just waiting, so I don't... Yep, there's only one Reaper. And so what Fantasy did, making only one Reaper, it's slightly risky, because what if Lings run by and get to the command center, the actual command center, and start denying it? Then he's not going to have anything, because his Rax is going to be making a reactor, and his Hellions aren't even out yet. So what Fantasy does is he positions his Reaper right outside of Roro's base to make sure that no Lings escape. So that's why the Reaper's over there. And that's what allows Fantasy to skip that one Reaper and to get out 2 Hellions a lot faster than normal. Now, Fantasy wants to get these 2 Hellions out faster than normal because he is doing a slightly unorthodox build. He doesn't want to stay too heavily in Hellion Banshee mode, and he wants to put the gear in... no, not reverse. That's a bad metaphor. He basically wants to get faster Hellions out so he can transition faster into the bio phase. And as a result of not making that Banshee, he is on 2 gas right now. He was on 1 gas. You take your second gas when you're making after the factory starts. So by skipping the Reaper, which is 50 gas, he effectively speeds up his tech by about 15 to 30, I think 30 seconds, because it takes about 1 minute to mine 100 gas. And Fantasy gets to see the third base as well, so he knows it's going to be a relatively standard macro game. Now, because he was able to make only 1 Reaper and he got his Hellions out faster, he now has a total of 4 Hellions when he would normally only have 2 if you did make 2 Reapers. So by getting these 2 Hellions out, or the first Hellions out faster, Fantasy does this cute little I guess a little like run by to scout the Zerg player. Now what this does is, by hitting at this timing with an accelerated 4 Hellions and 1 Reaper, Roro is not going to have any Evo chambers down, so he only has 3 Queens right now, and that's not enough to stop the Hellions from running right by. So Fantasy's timing exploits the fact that Roro is playing a standard game, and that his 2 Evo chambers that usually will wall off the Zerg player from these kinds of run-bys is not going to be up. And so that's why this run-by gets through and ends up being able to do an alright amount of damage. Now, it's not really good if you sacrifice 4 Hellions and a Reaper just to do damage, because then that delays your 3rd command center. But in this case, it's alright, because Fantasy, he's making a Cloak Banshee, or he's making a Banshee with Cloak. Banshees don't come with Cloak. And he is going to be making a 3rd command center relatively soon. But it has not even started yet, so he's not going to be taking his 3rd base for quite a little bit. And what Fantasy also does is he keeps making Hellions. So like I said before, he's going to make a total of 10 Hellions. And if I pause the game right now, or I open the game up and you guys looked at the production tab, it kind of looks like Fantasy's doing a mech opener, right? It's kind of really surprising that he's going to end up going bio, because you don't really see any indication that he's going to go bio, and he has 6 Hellions as well. But he does stop at 6 Hellions. And what he does is to transition into his mid game, which is Marine, Marauder, Hellbat, and Thor. He's going to have 2 tech labs. This is the tech lab making on his Rax, and he's still making a Banshee, so that means he is making a 2nd tech lab, and he's not going to just switch it off from the starport. And what this does is it allows Fantasy to build another barracks on top of the tech lab of the starport. So he has two Marauder production, which is what this style, macro style requires you to have, because you need the Marauders to do additional tanking along with the Hellbats. Now this Cloak Banshee is doing quite a good amount of damage. You can't rely on it doing a lot of damage, but Roro is slightly behind because he did lose about 10 workers to the Hellion run-by, so his timing is all off. That's why his Spore Crawler is slightly late. And so Fantasy's able to get some economic damage going on. And like I said, this Hellion Banshee opener is a very, very safe opener, and at the same time, you also have a little window where you can be aggressive with it. because Hellions and Banshees are really, really great against everything that are not roaches. So I also want to just pause briefly and say that Fantasy is also making a Viking to deny any kind of Overlord scouts. You can see there's 2 Overlords positioned near his base, so that Viking will be able to get rid of both of them. And what this does is it covers up if Fantasy is going for bio or not. And Roro still might not know, depending on how good of a scouting player he is. The Zerg player might not recognize that you're going bio and might misread it as mech, because so far he's seen 4 Hellions run by and 2 Cloak Banshees, and that looks kind of a lot like mech. And Fantasy's adding 2 barracks and 2 engineering bays, and the Viking denies that vision. So Roro's going to be forced to scout with his Zerglings, and hopefully he'll be able to make the read that if he pokes a Zergling into the natural base, he's going to see a bunch of Marines, which means that he's going to be going for a bio play. So as the game turns into the mid stages, we can take a look and we can see that the 3rd base is almost going to be completed. He's going to be starting to mine it at about 10:30ish. 10:30 to 11 minutes is when he'll be able to safely land it. Now Fantasy does still have 6 Hellions out on the map, so he's going to be relatively safe to be able to land that 3rd base and start it mining, because that is the standard number that you have when you want to take your base. But Fantasy chooses to do something different, and this interacts with his late game goal and what he's trying to accomplish. So that's why he opts to, instead of playing defensive with his Hellions, he is going to be sending his entire army, his Hellion force, and his Marine force with 2 medvacs to this side of the map to clear out this creep. And I'll explain why it's important when he actually does it, which is momentarily. Now Roro, being very smart, he goes for a counterattack at this timing, which is usually when Fantasy is going to be moving out. Now I don't think this was planned per se. I think Roro was just trying to get some scouting information with these Lings, or to set up a surround, because the Hellions are over here and Roro's Lings came in from this direction. So if the Hellions were still here isolated, the Lings would have been able to sweep by and get a surround off, make it into a Zergy sandwich. So instead Roro chooses, well, once he swings around he sees that there's 2 medvacs and a bunch of Marines, so he swings back to the 3rd because he knows that Fantasy is not going to have any defense, especially if Fantasy has a 3rd base. So Roro, that's a very good job by Roro. He's making the best of what he can in the situation. Now this scan is very important for Fantasy, because with this Hellbat, I'm just going to start saying non-Widowmine style, engaging off of creep is essential to winning any engagement. Now the ideal course would be to have part of your army on creep and the other army off of creep, but you really need your entire army off of creep if you want to win an engagement, because that's when you can confidently say that you can win an engagement. And we see Fantasy, he's stepping on top of creep right now, but that's only because Roro is he's flooding in Zerglings. He doesn't really have much of defense besides these queens, and Fantasy was able to snipe off 1, which helps add to the fact that Roro is going to have a slower time spreading creep by 2, 3, 2, 4, 5, 6. So what is that? About like 14, 12%. Because 1/7 is 14 and 1/5. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 12%. Alright, so if we take a look at the buildings that Fantasy has right now, he has these 3 Raxes. That's pretty standard for the 3 Reaper, or the 3 Command Center Reaper expand into Hellion. So usually add 2 Raxes and then 2 Engineering Bays, and then 2 more Raxes as you start making Medvacs and Widowmines. So the slight alteration here is that Fantasy has he's making he has the tech lab that is going to be used for future barracks, and he is not making any Widowmines. Those are really the only 2. Okay, well he made 1 Widowmine for defense. It's good to have 1 Widowmine at home to defend against possible counterattacks, they do a lot of damage. And he also has the Banshee as well. So that Banshee can also act as a spotter over here, and also against counterattacks, because they do two-shot banelings. So, we know that Fantasy isn't making any Widow Mines. Okay, so he has 2 Widow Mines. Jesus. He made 2 Widow Mines. He only uses them defensively, though. So, I would say he puts one here, and then another one here. But I'll keep an eye on that and point it out later in the game. So right now, Fantasy is just being the typical annoying with his Terran. He wants to try to deny the creep as much as possible, and we can see that it has been denied. The growth of the Zerg creep tumors has been stopped temporarily, although Roro does have 4 queens spreading creep, so that creep is going to be starting to spread really soon and really fast again. Now, what we see Fantasy do here, and the player that comes to mind that does it the same amount as him, Polt, he loves to split his army up into 2 different units, and he'll have his main force that will be pressuring Roro, like Roro's main army, and then he'll have a second contingency force that isn't supposed to do damage. It's just there to clear creep and draw units away from the main force. And that's what we see Fantasy have here. He has a medevac full of units over here, and then he has his main army moving out, and it's going to deny some creep over there. Now, if we look at what's happening in the game, Fantasy's ultra-aggressive mode... Oh my god, he's making 2 more Widow Mines. Alright, so Fantasy's ultra-aggressive mode is... Basically, he opened up with a faster than normal Reactor Hellions. He did a 4 Hellion run-by with 1 Reaper that hits before the Zerg player, Roro, has any evolution chambers. You can see on the minimap he has them now. So Fantasy completely avoided that, and he was able to do some damage, and that made his Cloak Banshee follow-up even stronger, because Roro was caught slightly off guard. His pants weren't down, his zipper was just down. So Roro was caught a little bit off guard. He lost a decent amount of drones, but it's by no means a game ender. But Roro is behind at this point. So that's why the supply is up like that. I think in a more normal, depending on how much damage the Zerg takes, the supplies would be within 10 to 10 supply, depending on which player did a better job at defending / attacking. So right now it appears that Fantasy is... Okay, so he didn't keep those 2 Widow Mines in a defensive positioning. He ends up using these Widow Mines to create a little... what do I call it? A little, like, not a forward rally point. He's not rallying his units. Just like a forward military camp zone where his units can safely retreat off of the creep after they go onto the creep and clear the creep tumors. So that's what these Widow Mines are used for, and Fantasy's making 2 more Widow Mines. So I guess I don't really have a... I guess it's a... He hasn't started his Hellbat production just yet. He's adding 2 more barracks, he's adding a factory, and he's starting +1 vehicle weapons. This is where the style starts to differ, in the fact that he's only adding 2 more barracks. A normal TvZ with just Bio Widow Mine would normally add another factory and then 3 more barracks, and you wouldn't be getting +1 attack, you'd be getting +1 armor. But since Fantasy's getting Hellbats and Thors, +1 attack serves a better purpose here. So, Fantasy, he has... You can see on the minimap there's his 2 Widow Mines, and here's his other 2 Widow Mines. So he basically just used those first 2 Widow Mines when 1-1 finished. Let me just go back so it reinforces the point. When 1-1 was done, Fantasy used a Marine force with the first 2 Widow Mines he produced out of the factory to clear a little bit of creep on the other side of the map. After he cleared creep with the force of 6 Hellions and the first 2 medvacs full of Marines. And now he's switching to this side, and with the first 2 Widow Mines and a group of Marines and I think 2 medvacs, or he just has 1 right now, then he clears the creep there. So he's pushing the zerg back. He's being as aggressive as he possibly can because he is slightly ahead. You have to take that into consideration. And he basically has control of the game. And what we notice here is that Fantasy has not taken any large engagements. It's mostly him stepping onto creep, and if it's safe to maybe tickle the queens, try to kill off a couple zerglings before picking up, and mostly clearing creep. So as we see here, that one marine force, he split his army up into 2 different units. This one marine force cleared the creep again, and it's stopping Roro's creep spread from spreading, which is very important. Fantasy wants the creep spread to be as far away from Roro's fourth base as possible, so that Fantasy can establish a forward military point as close to Roro's 4th base as possible. Now, after these 4 Widow Mines, we can start to see Hellbats being produced, and I believe one of these barracks is on top of the tech lab, and the other one is just a naked barracks. And we can see Blue Flame starting to be produced right after the first 2 Hellions are done. So Fantasy is making this all big important switch to Marauder, or basically a non-Widow Mines. And we can see again on the bottom side of the map, he's scanning and killing creep. He wants the creep to be far away from this possible 4th base location, so that if Roro does take it, Fantasy will be able to deny it pretty easily. Now, Fantasy is playing to the map. We don't see this map on ladder. We don't really get a good chance to play it at all, so it might be a bit tricky to visualize what he's doing and applying it to different maps. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do here, is to explain what he's doing in the most basic sense so that it can be copied and replicated to different maps. Because it is a solid macro style. I mean, he basically replaces the Widow Mines with Hellbats. And he's starting to make a Thor as well. And Fantasy is just in a really fantastic position right now because of that early game pressure. He did get an advantage from opening Hellion Banshee and being aggressive and being able to deal damage with it. So Roro right here, he knows that he can't engage Fantasy's army, which is over here clearing creep. So he tries to do a counterattack, but Fantasy already has some units at home. So this counterattack I don't necessarily like. Yeah, Roro does turn back, but since Roro is behind, all he is going to try to do this entire game is go for these kinds of counterattacks so that he can try to get even with Fantasy's economy and then burrow Banelings and force Fantasy to use scans, which he wants to throw meals down, because Roro's trying to go for the economy rather than Fantasy's army. So that's also a small reason why Fantasy's supply is so high up. And this is normally what a Zerg player will try to do if they know they're behind and they know that their army can't match yours, and because you took some economic damage, you had to make an extra round of drones, so you didn't have an extra round of units to maybe push the Terran player back. So here goes for another counterattack. And Fantasy, very smartly, he makes a sensor tower that covers both areas of possible attacks. So he has this chokeway covered, and he has this chokeway covered, and this is his Banshee positioned right outside of his 3rd base. So he's going to be aware of all counterattacks coming in from both sides of the map. So if if you're playing on a map with 2 chokeways or multiple chokeways that can be covered with 1 sensor tower, it would be best to do so, or it'd be a really good idea to make a sensor tower so that both sides are covered. So what we're seeing here is Fantasy has switched the sides that his main army is on and that his small bioforce is on. But at the same time, he still has his army split into like a 90% and 10% army. One is to clear creep and the other is to keep the Zerg army in place. And this is when Fantasy's going to start to really look for some cost-efficient trades right when he hits 2-2. Because even in an even game, the Zerg's upgrades would be at 2-2 when Fantasy's at 2-2, so he wants to hit a timing attack at even upgrades to get the most cost efficiency as possible. And as we can see here, Fantasy, his very trademark two-pronged attacks. So one of the advantages of having your army split up into two different units is that one of them can pick up and fly into a different spot and act as a multi-pronged attack force. And that's exactly what Fantasy is doing with that medevac over there. And what he's doing here is he was just trying to scan some creep. I think he was also scanning for Baneling busts. No, not Baneling busts, burrowed Banelings, because Roro did have burrowed Banelings over there earlier in the game. So this is not, Fantasy's army is kind of caught out of position. So that was a good trade for Roro, but it wasn't a game ender. Now, this is important because his Mutalisks get pulled out of position, and his entire army, Roro's entire army, or at least most of his units, there's still a little force there, but a lot of his army got pulled to deal with this single medvac drop. And that's all that Fantasy wanted Roro to do. So now Fantasy has more units here so that he can go ahead and scan creep and get closer to this ever important fourth base. And Fantasy scanned the creep area over here next to Roro's potential fourth base about 3 times this game already. So about 3 times in 6 minutes. And he really wants to keep this creep spread from really getting too far out of hand, because if the creep spread was over here, then Fantasy would have to camp outside of the creep spread and it would be that much farther away from the fourth base. But because Fantasy has been clearing the creep spread is only over here, right outside the fourth base, and it's a much shorter path for Fantasy to be able to attack into Roro's fourth base. And so that drop just allowed Fantasy to gain some advantageous positioning. And there we go. We see that he has his 2 Marauder production and 9 Marine production, 1 Thor, and he has a second factory for 2 Hellbats, so that's what his maximum production capacity is. And the small variation I just want to point out again is that he gets 2 barracks on Tech Labs to produce 2 Marauders at a time, and then what he does, the 9 Marines are 4 reactors and then 1 naked Rax. And he adds those 2 racks. He adds those 2 Raxes when he adds the second factory. So he'll add 1 Rax on the Tech Lab and then keep the other Rax bare. So what we see now is on the minimap, we can take a look, and Fantasy is now camping right outside of the creep, and more importantly, right outside of Roro's fourth base. So it's very important to limit the spread of creep. And this is a map-specific thing. You can't do it on every map, obviously, but being able to just keep some units on top and have some units on the bottom makes it impossible for Roro to cost-effectively engage that force, especially since it's off creep too. So what Roro wants to do is another counterattack and try to make the game a 3-base Zerg versus a 2-base Terran. And he does a decent job, but that's a lot of Banelings for not that many SCVs, in my opinion. That's still a lot. That was a lot of Banelings, and he only killed about 16 workers. So you can't do this small medvac elevator harass. But what we can take from this game that can be used on any map is that Fantasy wants to keep the creep spread cleared as much as possible, and he does that multiple times throughout the game in order to siege up in a location as close as possible to Roro's fourth base. And you can see on the minimap he has his army very neatly pre-spread so that Roro cannot cost effectively engage that off of creep. So it's very important. Alright, so that's a really nice picture of that. He has the Thors in front, he has the majority of the Marines behind, and he has most of the Marauders and the Hellbats in front as well. And he also has a couple of Hellbats here, just in case Roro tries to flank him. So basically all possible sides where the Zerg can attack have the big tanky units, and the rest are spread out behind the tanky units. And this is the optimal pre-spread that you want before any engagement, and it's very important to get this done as soon as possible. And then you can just hold position your units and take a few at a time and poke forth and trade off units. As we can see here, Fantasy is able to trade all those banelings for those 2 marauders, and he's really doing a good job of abusing the map. Roro is forced to do this because he needs to stop those marauders from killing this base, because that's his only mining base. And so he loses almost all those banelings for just 2 marauders. And the same thing can be done on an even ground. For example, if Fantasy is trying to push the 3rd base, and you just have a small group of units in front to kind of like bait the Zerg player into attacking, and then you kill banelings and such, and you try to get him to attack into your pre-spread army, because the Zerg just can't attack into that. He's going to lose if he does. And so at this point of the game, Roro is trying to go for he's trying to limit Fantasy's economy, but by doing that, he gives up the power to really defend any bases he has, because Fantasy's entire army is here and Roro traded his army away for economy. So this game goes on for a bit longer, but at this point Fantasy is in a dominating position, and soon Roro is only on 2 bases right now, so soon Fantasy is going to be able to completely roll over Roro in a move. So I guess I'll talk about some of the nice things that Hellbat Thor serves over Widowmine Thor, and it's that Hellbats are a lot easier to pre-spread out than Widowmines, because for Widowmines you have to burrow them, and then you also have to kind of be aware of what the Widowmines are going to shoot, and if they're like going to shoot a lone Zergling, then they're not worth it, but if they kill like 6 banelings, then they're worth it. Hellbats, they kind of take the, I guess, variable luck factor out on what the Widowmine's going to hit. The Hellbats are always going to do a certain amount of damage, and they're always going to be able to tank a certain amount of hits and deal a certain amount of damage with the Blue Flame. I believe Blue Flame 2-shots Zerglings, so even though Hellbats can't one-hit anything, they do tank up shots and make Banelings and Zerglings weaker for the Marines and Marauders and back to finish. And this army works as kind of like a multi-layered tanking army, because there are Hellbats and Marauders that you have to go through before you get to the Marine army. So it's very important to keep your units in front, to keep the tanky units in front of your less tanky units, because if you do lose all the Marines, then you're going to just get cleaned up by Mutalisks and Zerglings. The Marines are your kind of glass cannon that you want to keep alive. And yeah, this game is basically over, so I won't go to the very end, because Roro is kind of just staying in pride, but he doesn't really have much of an economy left. I guess I will wait until the final fight. But Fantasy is up a lot of units. And notice how he always has his tanky units in front of his Marines. It's just a very important concept that you have to use to keep your army. See, Marines are all protected by the Hellbats, the Thors, and the Marauders. It's just he has it everywhere. It's always positioned like that, and you have to be aware and position your army like that. Otherwise, if you lose your Marines, you're gonna lose the fight. Where is this fight? Okay, I can't really find the fight. I think Roro just ends up counterattacking a lot. Yeah. Alright, so the important thing I wanted to go over is Fantasy's spread out army over there. And once again, keep your Marines in the back and your Hellbats and Marauders in front and pre-split. That's the most important thing you can do to make this composition work. And to stay off of creep. You want to keep creep as far as far subdued as possible. And yeah, so let's take a look at the second game here. And it's going to be between Flash and DongRaeGu. So Flash basically does the same style. He makes more than one Marauder. He doesn't make a lot of Widow Mines, and instead opts to use Hellbats and Thors to deal with DongRaeGu's Muta-Baneling force. But Flash makes a critical error, and he engages on DongRaeGu's creep. I think he just overestimated the amount of units that DongRaeGu had, and as a result, Flash was able to lose that. Let me just skip all the way towards that, because I want to keep it fresh in your guys' minds. Alright, so this is his tragic mistake. As we can see, 2 Marauders, 8 Marines, Hellbats, Thor, +1 weapons. He's doing basically the exact same style that Fantasy did, although his opening was slightly different. And as we can see here, he has 2, 4, 6, 8 Hellions, a Reaper, and a Marauder, Marine, Hellbat force. Now, as Flash is engaging on creep, he just scanned, so all this creep over here in the bottom left-hand side is gone, but the creep is still there. So even though DongRaeGu doesn't have the map vision, he does have the speed bonus that the units gain. So if we take a look here at what happens, Flash is basically trying to get the 4th base and then trade cost effectively, but something else happens. And Flash ends up losing all of these units and takes a very cost ineffective battle. And he made some mistakes. I mean, he didn't completely bungle it. Like we saw here, he pre-spreads his army. It's lagging. Please play. Alright, cool. So he does pre-spread his army right here. Oops. Yep, there we go. He pre-spreads his army, but some small mistakes he makes is that all of his Marines, their backs are against the Banelings and Zerglings and Zerg army. And these Hellbats, they're not tanking anything. There's more Marines in front. So Flash's army's pre-spread, although his units are pre-spread, it is important. It is oh so important to keep the Marines in the back. Otherwise, they aren't going to do as much damage. And even though the supplies are even right now, DongRaeGu takes a very one-sided engagement. See, the Marines are just, they're on the front lines, and they shouldn't be on the front lines. And the Marauders and Hellbats should not be in the back. And that's why you're going to lose engagements like this. And the fact that he's fighting on creep. Although the on creep would be like, the Zerg's going to win the battle, but you would only fight on creep to force him to give up his army. And if Flash was able to kill that 4th base, which he was targeting down, but DongRaeGu's Baneling speed finished just in the nick of time, if he was able to kill the 4th base and then trade cost effectively, he would be on 3 bases versus 3 bases, so that trade would be alright. But since his Marines were just against the Zerglings, and his Hellbats and his Marauders were not tanking any damage, he lost the fight. And even though they were even at the start, DongRaeGu ends up being 30 supply ahead, and that's why Flash ends up losing this game. Because he just messed up the engagement. And I like how there's both of these games, they're doing the same styles, but it really shows what you should be doing in a fight and what you should not be doing in order to win this fight. So I just want to go, I'm going to go through this opener as well, because it's not a Hellion Banshee opener, but it is another possible mech opener. It's a 3 command center into Blue Flame Hellions. It's slightly more economic than Fantasy's Hellion Banshee, but it is also 100% safe, because you do have a second factory with a tech lab that can make siege tanks if there are going to be any all-ins. So it's very versatile and also adaptable. You can transition into mech after this as well, but Flash decides to go bio. So that's what I like about this style and the other style. They're both cheese proof, and you can go either mech or bio off of them fairly easily. So, Flash, Reaper Expand on a 4-player map. It's not as rare as seeing all these girls with signs, and so many of them as well. I think that's the same squad that was that was in Fantasy and Roro's game. But yeah, Reaper Expand on this map is acceptable. I think it's alright because the Reapers offer crucial scouting information, and with a 14cc you are susceptible to early pool builds, like let's say I think maybe not a 10 pool but a 6 pool on a 4-player map like Frost, so that's why you just can't go for 14cc right off the bat. DongRaeGu makes one mistake here that I don't like, and that is sending the Overlord in. Unless Flash, I think Flash actually looked for it. If we look at this SCV, so Flash does send the SCV over here to scout for the Overlord, so never mind about DongRaeGu's mistake. Basically, so on a 4-player map like Frost, as soon as you finish the barracks, if you send the SCV to your natural, you'll be able to catch the Overlord coming from that direction before he has a chance to turn around, which is very smart. So DongRaeGu now just sends his Overlord across through Flash's base because he knows he's been spotted, and Flash already knows where DongRaeGu is without having to scout, which is awesome. That timing might not work on Ultrazim Stronghold, but it definitely is applicable to these positions on Frost, where you just, after your barracks is done, you send your SCV to your natural to scout for the Overlord, and if you find it, then you know where your opponent is already. Cool. So Flash is doing a very standard Reaper Expand opening, but he ends up transitioning into two factory Blue Flame Hellions, and once again he also makes just one Reaper. He doesn't make a second Reaper because he knows he doesn't necessarily need it. This first Reaper, all of its purpose is to check for the gas timing, and then again he's probably going to camp it outside of the natural, because the only downfall to this style is that even though you do get faster Hellions out and a faster factory, your command center is slightly vulnerable. So you have to make sure, like what Flash is doing right now, he's just staying in this area to make sure that DongRaeGu isn't able to sneak a couple Zerglings past his Reaper and into his natural to delay the command center. Oh, and looks like we do see Flash going for a second Reaper. Very interesting. Oh, okay, so I know what Flash did. He made one Reaper, then he made a reactor, and then he made the second Reaper. I don't quite understand why, though. I don't think one is more effective than the other. Actually, I think it's because he gets to get the factory out faster, because he makes the reactor, and then he makes the factory, and then he makes one Reaper. Okay, so that's just an optimized little tweak to the Reaper Expand. And Flash is already throwing down a third command center. He uses it as part of his wall, which is, I think, completely necessary, because then you only need, I believe, 2 to 3 depots to wall off. And you don't need a bunker as well, and then you can build a bunker behind, so you have multiple walls. And so there's the second factory going down, and he made a fast third command center. So this is a very economical opening. The Blue Flame sets Flash up for an excellent late game or mid to late game stage, because he'll have Blue Flame researched earlier than Fantasy did. His build just flows very well together, and that's one thing I like about it. So DongRaeGu, he's a pretty from watching this, I've already watched this VOD, and I really like how smart DongRaeGu is. He gets Overlord speed because he knows Flash is an unpredictable player, and because of Overlord speed, even though Flash has his barracks placed all the way in the corner, and he has a Marine on the top left position, and then he's going to have another Marine there, he's ready to deny all the Overlords, so DongRaeGu gets Overlord speed, so he's going to get a guaranteed scout of Flash's base, and I just think that's a very underused upgrade in this matchup for scouting, because it's very important to scout what your opponent is doing. So, as we can see here, Flash made a tech lab on the second factory instead of using the barracks to make a tech lab on the factory. He actually made a separate barracks, or he made a separate tech lab on the barracks so as not to delay his stim that much, and to also be able to continue marine production. So, at this point in the game, Flash has 6 Hellions and 2 Reapers. It's pretty standard, and DongRaeGu has not scouted yet what Flash is doing. He doesn't know that Flash is saving up any Hellions. So Flash is just denying creep tumors. One good thing that you can do with your Hellions, you don't want to sacrifice them. So one thing that a lot of professional players do is after they check the third base, like what Flash is doing right now, if you sit outside the Zerg's creep line and you wait for him to start building tumors, you can snipe the tumors off, and that basically acts like a free scan because you're killing tumors for free without a scan. And it's just a little small thing that you can do to stop creep spread. And this marine just completely glitched out. It's very funny. TBS, very funny. So this scouting overlord ends up being able to see everything. He sees that Flash has 4 additional Hellions, so he adds on a Roach Warren because of that, but it's already kind of too late because Flash's Blue Flame is almost finished. Now this is a very, very mineral intense build. Flash hasn't added he just now added his second gas in. We can see that on the minimap, as well as starting two engineering bays. Only after he finished his third command center, started producing 3 Hellions at a time, and marine production as well. And here we go, DongRaeGu can see that Blue Flame, but Flash's Blue Flame is already finished, so it's a bit too late to react. And Flash, he's doing the best he can in this situation, just trying to kill whatever he can. He's forcing DongRaeGu to produce a lot of lings, and he's able to kill all the drones and prevent mining at the third base. So, oh, and more importantly, he is able to get all of these, maybe not all of these queens, but the majority of these queens, which really stifles DongRaeGu's creep spreading ability, which we can see here. Okay, yeah, he does get all the queens. And he prevents mining at the third base, while at the same time he went for a third command center of his own. So Flash is in an excellent position. DongRaeGu still has a large worker lead, but he is only on 2 bases. So he's getting roach speed right now because he doesn't quite, he might need the roaches still, because he doesn't quite, okay, he does have the overlord, he sees the 2 engineering bays, so he's just getting the roach speed because of these Hellions, but yeah, he cancels it because he realizes that Flash is indeed going for bio. The mind games that goes on with these players sometimes. Alright, so Flash is doing a really great job with these Hellions. Once again, it's just one of those openers that can be used offensively like this, and defensively, like you can make siege tank production and you'll be able to defend even though you took a very fast third against any Roachbane aggression, as long as you scouted in time. And it takes siege tanks 60 seconds to build, so you just have to scout it fast enough. So Flash is basically transitioning now into the same type of game that Fantasy did, and I would give the lead to Flash ever so slightly because he was able to deny DongRaeGu's economy for a fairly long time. He's just now starting to mine from his third base. So if not even, I would consider Flash slightly ahead. And this is kind of like the position that Fantasy was in versus Roro. And if we look at the infrastructure, there's a Rax with a tech lab over there, and there's another Rax with a tech lab, and then there are 2 more Raxes. Oh, actually, one of the Raxes with the tech lab is with the factory over there, and that factory made another tech lab. And then this Rax has a reactor, that Rax has a reactor, and then these Raxes are probably going to have reactors as well. So Flash's infrastructure is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Raxes, 2 factories, and 1 starport. And in this game, Flash doesn't go for any Widow Mines at all. He immediately starts his Hellbat production as soon as his armory is going to be finished, because he has ID'd DongRaeGu's build. He's going to be doing a Mutalisk Baneling build with the Blue Flame Hellion harass, and he already has Blue Flame researched as well from that. So that's what I just like about Flash. His builds are they line up really nicely. I need water, my throat's dying. Alright, so Flash is in a really good position right here. He has a decent sized army, and DongRaeGu has almost nothing on the ground. So I would definitely say that Blue Flame Hellion harass was a success. That's all the damage you need to do. You don't have to end the game, you just have to deny mining from the third. Try to kill as many queens as possible. They're a priority because they keep the creep spreading. And to just try to force DongRaeGu to produce as many lings as possible, which Flash ended up doing. So Flash is in a good position right now. See, his Hellbats are out fairly fast, and he skipped the Widow Mines. So that's one cool thing about this build. And so what I have to choose my words carefully. I'm starting to spit random stuff out now. So basically, this is the point in the VOD where I showed, first of all, that Flash messed up on his pre-spreading control. He has a bunch of Hellions, and he has a bunch of Marines, Marauders, and Medvacs. So what these Hellions, since he has 12 Hellions still, he should have kept these Hellions ahead of the rest of his army, and he should have used the Hellions to clear the creep spread while keeping his entire Bioforce backwards. And he kind of does that, but then he runs into Mutalisks. And so this is okay by him, but he should okay, so he's keeping his Hellions in front, which is good, in front of, or as a buffer between Flash's army and DongRaeGu's army. And this is where his mistake comes in, that Fantasy to not do. His spreading is alright, but then when he goes to attack the fourth, he messes it up. And so all he has time for is to pre-spread his army, but his units are not tanking properly, and so that's why he ends up losing this game. Those are his Marines, Hellbats just behind the Marines, and it should be the opposite, and that's why he loses this game so hard. So yeah. So those are the games that those are the games that I want to show you guys. I think they're very good games because they contrast each other. There is one game where Fantasy is successful with this new non-Widowmine style, and also where Flash ends up losing because of his big battle control and because he didn't have his units pre-spread properly. So when you're doing this style, keep in mind that you want 2 Marauders producing instead of the normal 1, and you don't want to rely on Widow Mines as much. Fantasy built 4 Widow Mines to transition out, or to stay safe and to transition out of his Hellion Banshee play, while Flash was able to produce Hellbats immediately because he did a Blue Flame play and he had Blue Flame already. So that just about wraps up the recording for today. And if you guys have any suggestions for games you want me to go over, or have any questions that need to be answered, just leave a question in the comment and I'll get to it with a VOD of its own. Alright, good.